And I'm going to be talking about a graduate trainee lecturer programme which was framed within work-based learning and is also related to the philosophy of work integrated learning. And it's a case study approach, and the chapter was co-authored by Maurice, Lukadi and Annette Warner, as well as myself. So the study was framed to look at that first year of employment of a teacher, which is considered to be critical, because it's at this time when the concept of the teacher, the self as a teacher starts to actually develop. And the experience and the knowledge that they gain significantly influences their future professional development. And the chapter illustrates quite clearly the journeys of trainee lecturers on a programme, which is quite a different programme. It's a kind of programme that I hadn't seen before, and I've not seen since. And the programme was designed to introduce participants to the how of teaching in higher education, helping them to confront the issues of learning to teach, with an aim to develop their capacity to investigate problems, quote, make judgments on the basis of sound evidence, take decisions on a rational basis, and understand what they are doing and why. So there are three objectives of the study. And the first one was to clearly outline the training and the journeys of these junior lecturers, known as teaching fellows, within a UK higher education institution. The second objective identified the Gen Y and Gen Z characteristics of the fellows who were students who are now being trained to teach within the institution that taught them, whilst being considered as credible lecturers by the very lecturers who actually taught them. And this enabled an exploration of some of the Gen Y and the Gen Z characteristics, and whether these supported or actually impacted on the fellows' development throughout their time on the programme. And the third objective shared the findings of qualitative research, which uncovered a lot of feelings and attitudes towards their experiences, and also highlighted three quite distinct areas which have been crucial to the development of the teaching fellows, namely social learning, which is the premise of Lave and Wenger's community of practice, the imposter syndrome, and also how critical reflection was effectively practiced as a means to not only learn from their experiences, but also to put into action what they'd actually learned. So if we look at the institution, it was a local institution that offered private higher education, and they served a local population, embracing the opportunities of diversity and inclusion. The 55% of the student body, of the undergraduate student body, was made up of students aged 30 and over, and around 90% were representative of Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Largely, these students were ones who were also returning to education after a significant absence, and as a result were often less confident about the prospect of studying in higher education. And these students were non-traditional. They were differentiated by ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, disability, geographical location, and historically had low participation rates in UK higher education due to not being effectively served by traditional institutions. And serving these groups of students required a commitment to change their outcomes, which the institution had, and they wanted to provide a service and a system which was more equitable for these students. Now, the government introduced the widening participation in higher education agenda to address the differences in access to and progression within HE universities. And also with an awareness of the importance that academic success, particularly at undergraduate level, how important it is for the UK and other countries driven by a knowledge economy. The institution reviewed its curriculum of undergraduate and postgraduate programs in 2015, and the focus was now on employability opportunities, illustrated quite clearly in their new offerings. They changed the way that they were teaching, they accommodated the learning styles of students, and they made a radical change in how students were being assessed as well. So the actual teaching fellows program takes into consideration the suggestions from Darling, Hammond and Bransford that says that in addition to knowledge of subject matter and teaching techniques, trainees must also have knowledge of their learners and their social backgrounds. Now, the teaching fellows had the advantage of knowing the student body very well because they had been part of that student body for about 3 or 4 years. And they also had knowledge of the social purposes of education, having used that to inform their own choices for study. What they did lack, though, was the ability to be able to use their knowledge to influence the development of the curriculum that matches what students wanted and needed. They didn't have the experience of classroom management, and they had no knowledge of how to use criteria to assess the performance of students. And this is what the Teaching Fellows Programme was able to provide. It was an 18-month training programme, and it was structured by 6 3-month segments which mirrored the teaching semesters of the institution. Trainees gained experience in the key areas of higher education teaching, learning and assessment. They developed more of a comprehensive understanding of the institution, its strategy, its environment and its stakeholders. And interestingly enough, the Teaching Fellows Programme was situated between the traditional UK teacher training model, which is used to qualify graduates to teach in schools and post-16 areas. And on the other side, it also complemented the path to university lecturer. And the teaching fellows exited the programme on successful completion of the programme with a postgraduate qualification, which enabled them to be able to teach in higher education. The programme was heavily weighted on acquiring practical experience, as it was very important that the focus was on being able to produce work-ready graduates that could satisfy the demands of UK higher education. And just as important were the benefits for the fellows in enabling them to acquire practical knowledge and skills in authentic settings. And this involved a whole organisational approach to professional and institutional socialisation, which was achieved through allocating the teaching fellows at the very, very beginning of their time on the programme with strategic projects, offering them the opportunity to participate in team department away days, invitations to all staff briefings, and providing them with a voice in team, department and wider institutional meetings. It was really, really important that the teaching fellows felt at the very outset that they were actually part of the institution. The programme also contributed to graduate outcomes, so employability and graduate employability. And the program was able to respond to this by developing a program that offered opportunities to develop the skills that employers needed and better equipping students for the world of work. I'm conscious of the time. Where am I? So if we look at the actual makeup of the teaching fellows, the demographics within UK society, they shift constantly. And so it was important that when we recruited, when we were thinking about recruiting future lecturers, that was reflected in that. HE are the providers of teacher education, and they therefore have the potential to join the dots between teacher education and widening participation. Now, if you remember, as I said, the teaching fellows were actually recruited from an existing student body. So they were born out of the student body, which was very, very diverse in ethnicity and age. But they had a drive to change or improve their career prospects. The institution committed to ensuring its graduate opportunities were extended beyond just offering a degree. They recruited the fellows from a pool of graduates, preparing them for using their roles as professionals to better support the student body that they'd recently graduated from. And in doing so, the institution was also able to support the graduate outcomes data collected by the Higher Education Statistics Agency, which UK higher education institutions are duty bound to return each year. There were also generational attributes, which were a focus of the programme, and the 8 recruited fellows who participated in this study were aged between 24 and 37, and they were representative of Gen Y and Gen Z. Now, I won't go through the characteristics of Gen Y and Gen Z individuals. I'm sure you're aware of it, but I would like to draw your attention to the highlighted quotes. So Beastock and Clifford state that Gen Ys are eager for their work to make a difference to a larger movement for positive change, making these characteristics ideal for teaching, the assumption being that Gen Y teachers would be motivated by being able to positively impact the lives of others in society. And if we look at Gen Z, Carter theorizes that they have a desire to be involved with transformational rather than transactional activities in their world. So they prefer to know that they're making a difference in the world rather than simply making money. And this transformational over transactional desire for Gen Z has its roots firmly in approaches to problem solving and project-based activities, which lends itself to real life issues. Both the Gen Y and Gen Z teaching fellows became a natural fit, we thought, within the institution to be able to deliver the new portfolio of programs following the institution's curriculum review. So very, very quickly, just touching on the methodology and the methods. Clearly, we used qualitative research. We used a case study approach. The teaching fellows were already within an environment which was familiar and non-threatening, and it therefore provided a holistic view of how they behaved in a naturalized environment. It was able to capture the lived experiences of the fellows throughout their time on the programme, and it also allowed us to explore fully their perceived experiences. The study was also insider research, which the researcher, it was based within the researcher's own practice, and it therefore offered the researcher direct access to data, plus the researcher understood the topic and how it was situated. And the social situatedness of the study representing the researcher, the situation and the context, enabled the researcher to draw on the shared understandings and the trust of the fellows. So 2 methods were employed. There were structured interviews with 6 of the 8 teaching fellows who were on the programme between 6 to 9 months. And this was used to highlight the common challenges that they faced as they continued to grow and engage in the process of collective learning. The researcher was also their manager. So there was an awareness of explicit and implicit power relationships which may be evident. So in order to be able to capture as honest as data as possible, the data was collected by video in the absence of the manager, and the questions were asked by a member of the wider team who didn't have a vested interest in the responses. So the fellows faced similar challenges when they first started on the programme. The main one being the transition from student to academic member of staff and managing the expectations of staff who were previously their lecturers and were now their colleagues. So the teaching fellows were faced with their practices being open to scrutiny, especially at a time when their own beliefs in their own abilities may have been tested. So they were asked the question, what do you consider have been the significant challenges that you faced on the programme? One of the things that they mentioned was the importance of the motivation to grow, which is linked to a sense of self-efficacy. And this was intensified by challenges and the continued self-questioning of the teaching fellows experience, as you can see in the example of the quotation there. Another question that was asked were, what learning theories have you been able to personally relate to? And the 2 theories that the fellows referred to were Hertzberg's theory of motivators and hygiene factors, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it was felt that the programme would and should be able to satisfy all the elements of Maslow's pyramid in order to ensure their success. And wanting a connection and a sense of belonging was a common theme throughout their time on the programme, which links nicely to the community of practice. And it's interesting to note that the fellows within the name teaching fellows was chosen purposefully because it actually characterizes a friendly relationship with a group of people who share similar interests, and we felt that this emphasized a supporting nature that was developed by the fellows, and this happened quite organically. So the fellows were asked, what do you consider is a significantly supportive aspect of the programme? They talked about a sense of belonging. That was a common phrase that came up. They also spoke about the feeling of being safe, illustrating how they had found the ability to be part of a smaller, distinct group, something that offered support and mutual engagement. And I'll be finishing now, but I just wanted to close with the final 2 participants who were required to write a reflective account of their journeys as teaching fellows. They'd both completed the Teaching Fellows programme. They were now employed as lecturers within the same institution, and these reflective accounts provided an opportunity for a closer examination of the 2 areas which they felt were fundamental to their training and development. The first being imposter syndrome. And if you can have a quick look at the actual quote coming from one of the teaching fellows, that despite having a degree of subject knowledge, they'd had industry experience, they'd got experience and skills gained throughout the programme, they still struggled with their newfound identity. And the final participant was asked, what fundamental experience influenced your journey as a teaching fellow? And this individual, they'd never been exposed to reflective practice before, and actually owned up to the fact that they initially struggled with it. But after being introduced to what Dewey highlighted as the thinking teacher's 3 essential attributes, they were able to fully engage with reflective practice, and understood the importance of critical reflective practice as well. So to sum up, the Teaching Fellows Programme was designed to provide a unique approach to training young lecturers, which was otherwise not available. The study highlighted a range of issues which the fellows faced within the workplace, and some of the experiences discussed by the teaching fellows seemed at times to be at odds with the characteristics that we know encompasses generations Y and Z as being confident and self-assured. However, their recruitment onto the programme evidenced the institution being able to shape the development of future educators. And I just wanted to end with this quotation, that they are agents of knowledge economy, doing knowledge work through research whilst being able to train new generations of knowledge workers for the knowledge economy. And I do apologize for, I felt as though I'd raced through that presentation, but I wanted to keep on time as much as possible. So I believe that we have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Any questions?
Thanks, Paulette. So you mentioned there were 8 teaching fellows, and you interviewed 6 of them, and some of them got hired by the institution that was offering this fellow program.
All of them got.
All of them.
All of them were recruited. Yes, they went through a recruitment process, and all of them were able to get jobs as lecturers. So out of the 8, the 6 participated in the video research questions, the research interviews, and then the 2 fellows who had the longest experience, had actually gone through and completed the actual program. They gave their reflective accounts, but all of the fellows were fairly recruited into the institution.
And I probably missed that, but this is a training for future lecturers in higher education.
That's right.
But their disciplinary background is like anything, like they're coming from random disciplinary background?
Yes, we had some of the students had taken, for example, a bachelor's in oil and gas. Some had done an entrepreneurial degree. Some had done marketing, business management. So it was a spread of different degrees. And what I should have mentioned is that the institution was a business management school. So the degrees that they offered all veer towards business management and law.
So the fellowship is only restricted to the school, the business school?
Yeah, the program was restricted to students who had studied at the institution, and the training took place within the same institution. But towards the end of the Teaching Fellows program, teaching fellows were supported in applying for jobs, either internal and external to the institution. So it wasn't a guarantee that they would get work, permanent work, or even sessional work within the institution.
Right.
I mean, an interesting piece of research that we could do post this, because I was with Paulette in the institution, is the trajectory in terms of where some of these people have ended up. One of these is now an associate deputy dean, and they cut their teeth through this program, which is amazing.
Yeah, some of them are working abroad, because unfortunately the institution is no longer around. But individuals have gone on to work within higher education, some within private institutions, as well as public universities as well. And some have moved and gone into industry as well.
Right. I guess I'm just thinking out loud, because I think, you know, one of the things I remember as an undergrad and even as a graduate student is lamenting on, you know, faculty, research faculty, that, you know, they're hired for their research acumen and they get told to teach, and they're horrible teachers. And then the institution, you know, my experience with the institutions I went through as a graduate student is that the institution is very much aware of the need to help graduate students to be better teaching assistants and lab demonstrators and, you know, teaching fellows. But there's no enforcement mechanism to make the faculty any better in their teaching, other than just, you know, kind of, I don't even want to say shaming, but you get poor teaching evaluation and people kind of shrug it off and say, well, what do these young kids know? And you just move on. And sometimes the criticism is legit, sometimes it's not. But either way, there's no institutionalized way to get research faculty better in teaching right from the get-go. And I was kind of curious whether, because you said this is like a transition from, you know, lower level education to a lecturing position, which I don't know if that has a pathway for, you know, like tenure track faculty, research faculty, or that would be completely incidental.
The institution was quite different. The institution served a very, very different student body. They were not research intensive like a lot of public universities, and the emphasis on the program was about you know, experiential learning, developing skills, and research was kind of like accidental if it did happen.
Okay.
And it would mostly be around the interest of the individuals. But yeah, it was just such a completely, which is why I really enjoyed it, because it took an approach that was completely different and to what any other institution was offering. I mean, when you think about teaching, training to teach in higher education, it's usually someone that is along the PhD route, and you know, they would be, you know, cutting their teeth by being a teaching assistant, and you know, if they're lucky enough, they would get a postgraduate teaching qualification whilst they were doing that as well. But this was, it was such a different journey, you know, turning, you know, the graduates into educators within the same institution that they were actually educated in. It was an amazing experience, and the chapter will, you know, obviously provide a lot more context behind the actual students and the programs itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 7:10, I think.